Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Heather, and today we are doing another episode. I believe this is episode 4 maybe, in my challenge that I'm doing of reading books from every country. So welcome back to another episode of Around the World in Books. In today's episode, we are diving into Europe. If you saw the thumbnail, you'll know there's a lot of books that I'm covering in today's video. Basically, I've already kind of done a Europe episode with my Nordic Noir, which was the last one. But we're starting today's episode with basically the west side of Europe, and I'm gonna just start slowly working my way across the whole continent until we've covered all of the Europe stuff. So the reason that I decided to start with that system is partially because I've read quite a few of the further west countries already. Well, not quite a few, a couple of them. And then the second one is that I just got back from a trip to Paris, and so I figured while I was in France I should read a French author, and then I decided I'd just lump them all together into this one video. So some of the clips are going to be from my Paris trip. I took a couple books with me. We'll get into that in a second. The first thing I want to talk about is some of the books that I have already read. So I'm not going to be rereading them in this, but I thought I'd give you my reviews because I am counting them for some of the countries already. And the first one is for the United Kingdom, and for this one I've obviously read quite a few books from the United Kingdom, but I decided for the purposes of having something in my spreadsheet I would count The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have read the Lord of the Rings trilogy by him as well. If you want to see that, I do have a whole reading vlog of when I read that, so I do have that if you'd like to see my thoughts on the rest of the series. But I didn't really get a ton to talk about The Hobbit, and The Hobbit I like better than the rest of the series, like than the original trilogy. So if you don't know, The Hobbit is basically a prequel to The Lord of the Rings. This book I've actually given 5 stars. I've reread The Hobbit 3 or 4 times. I really like The Hobbit. I don't understand why they made it into so long of movies. If you feel intimidated, or if you've tried to read Lord of the Rings and felt like it was kind of slow, The Hobbit is much faster paced. It's obviously much tinier of a book. So I think this is where I would start jumping into the world of Lord of the Rings. And then if you like The Hobbit, you can jump into the other ones. But that's my book for the UK. I won't dwell too much on it. I really like The Hobbit. I've read it a lot. I've read it for the first time in potentially even elementary school. So I've had this book in my life for a long time. So that's going to be my one for the UK. The other country that I've read a book for is France. I've actually read a few French authors, so I'm going to talk about 2 of like the main ones that I've read, and then I actually did reread one because I felt like it was fitting to read a French author while I was in Paris. So first one that I have reread, or that I have read that I will not be rereading in this video, is Les Miserables, or Les Mis, by Victor Hugo. This one is hefty, and I do want to reread this at some point. We recently just found at Barnes & Noble this really pretty edition that's got like sketches of all of the characters on it. Super cool. Really impressed by who did this one. And this one, I think there's a few people that have translated it. This version that I have right now is translated by Christine Donaher, something like that. But I think there's a few different versions out there. I haven't read this one in a while. I actually read it in middle school, because we had to do AR tests, if you know about AR tests at that point, and I knew the plot of Les Mis from the musical, so I figured I'd read the book and then take the AR test, because that kind of does all my AR points that I needed that quarter, and so then I could just read whatever I wanted. If you don't know, Les Mis is kind of a hard book to describe the plot, but it is essentially, you have a whole cast of characters, and you start off, one of the main people you're following is Jean Valjean, and he is in prison at the beginning of the story for, honestly I can't even remember, obviously I need to reread this, And then he basically gets out of prison, runs into this priest. The priest gives him, basically, long story short, ends up saving him from some cops, gifting him some stuff that he tried to steal. And so then Jean Valjean decides to try and change his life. And it kind of goes from there. You have a whole other cast of characters that are involved. You've got the cop, Javert, that is hunting him down. You've got this mom and her daughter who he decides to help. He basically adopts the daughter when the mom dies. All sorts of stuff is going on in this book. So this one I definitely need to reread. I don't have a rating for it at this point because I did read it so long ago. So reread coming at some point. If you'd like a vlog when I do reread it, let me know. And the one that I actually have on my spreadsheet for France is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And this one that I have is translated by Robin Buss. This is another huge book. The Count of Monte Cristo is basically, you're following this character, and what is his name? Edmond Dantes. And he's like engaged to be married, and then this guy that wants to marry the girl that he's engaged to and some other people basically decide to get him out of the way. So they get him falsely sent to prison. And then it is his story of revenge, basically. And it's super complicated. There's lots of scheming, lots of fake identities. It's really kind of hard to keep track of all the people, I will say. But it's a really good plot for being 1,000 pages, more than 1,000 pages. This book is actually surprisingly quick read. So I do really like The Count of Monte Cristo. This one I've also given 5 stars. I quite like it, which is why I'm including it in this video. So would recommend. I know it looks highly intimidating, but it is worth the read. Because I'm filming this a little after the fact, I have read this book already, but while I was in Paris, I decided to pick up another French author because, like I said, might as well while I'm in France, right? So this isn't going on my spreadsheet, but I did figure I'd include it in this video. And this is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos. And it is, I might be saying that wrong. I feel like I'm saying that with more of a Spanish twist on it. And this is translated by Hildegard Searle. So this is book 1 in the Mirror Visitors series, and I feel like it has an interesting description. This is basically a book about this future Earth where Earth is kind of shattered and there's all these different pieces of it just like floating around the core. And so each piece has kind of got its own little mini world, and you're following this girl who's from the Ark, which is what they're called, the different pieces, that basically deals with the animation of objects and stuff like that. It's a forced marriage between her and someone from another Ark that is basically just snow craziness. There's a lot of political intrigue, stuff like that. I'm gonna finish talking through the books that I'm reading in this, and then we'll circle back around to this after I do my clips from Paris. But that's A Winter's Promise. And then the other one that I took to Paris with me is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This one is my pick for Ireland. This book is a classic. It's basically about this guy, Dorian Gray, and another person paints him, and then there's a bunch of stuff that goes into it. I talk about it in some of my clips from Paris. So again, we'll loop back around to this one in just a minute. Then we have my pick for Italy. This one I actually bought while in Paris, and this is by The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, I think is maybe how you say it. I'm not actually sure. And this is translated by William Weaver. And this one is basically a murder mystery slash philosophy book set in the 1300s in a monastery, and you're basically following a monk who is basically becoming the detective in a murder mystery. So again, get back into this one in a minute as far as vlog stuff, but that's my pick for Italy. Then we have my pick for Portugal. We're doing a lot of books in this video, so sorry this intro's so long. This is Death with Interruptions. I know it's published under another name in Portuguese, but that's the English version. I can't remember what the other original one is. And this is by Jose Saramago, and it is translated by Margaret Jewel Costa. And this book is basically about this little town or country somewhere in Europe. I don't think it ever really tells you where death just kind of goes away on vacation, basically. And so people stop dying. They're still aging, they're just not dying. And so it's basically following along with the consequences of that and what it looks like to have people stop dying. So that's that one, Death with Interruptions, for Portugal. And then the last one included in this video is for Spain. This is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and it is translated by Lucia Graves. And this one, I'm not 100% positive what all it's about. I think it's set in Barcelona, and he is a bookseller or something like that, and then he finds this book that people are trying to destroy, and so then it becomes this whole kind of mystery plot of why are people trying to destroy this book, what's in the book. He's now wrapped up in all of it. And again, this is my pick for Spain. So with all of that being said in this lengthy intro, these are the 5 new books that I'm reading in this video. I took a few of them with me to Paris, like I mentioned, so we're going to jump to the clips from Paris where I talk about A Picture of Dorian Gray, stuff like that, and then I will come and bring it back to this point and wrap up on the stuff that I didn't get to while in Paris. So let's jump to Paris. Hi guys. I haven't actually even filmed the intro for this yet, but I've been reading The Picture of Dorian Gray. I am now in Paris, which will be a jump from the intro that I'm going to be filming when I get home. Anyways, I'm about halfway through Picture of Dorian Gray, and I don't know what to think about this book yet. I really can't even tell what the plot is. Basically, so far, you have Dorian Gray, you have a painter named something Hallward, Basil Hallward, and then you have this like just random rich dude named Lord Henry. And Basil is a painter. He starts painting pictures of Dorian Gray. He becomes like his sitter. And so Lord Henry happens to be friends with Basil. He comes over and Basil basically introduces the two of them. So then Lord Henry starts becoming friends with Dorian Gray, and you're basically just following their social lives for a while. I think I finally got to what's going to be like the main point of the book, where this painting that Basil did of Dorian Gray, that's like his masterpiece. Dorian Gray takes it to his house and Basil gives it to him. But then he starts noticing that the portrait's like changing as he's having strong emotions or things are happening in his life. It like starts to like expose his like true inner thoughts onto this like painting. So I think that's gonna be where we're going with this. I could be totally wrong. Again, I'm only about halfway through this book, but I wanted to give an update before I fully finished it. So I don't know, the writing's really interesting. There's lots of very well thought out, deep things, lots of big words. It's a little hard to process, so I don't know, mixed feelings on it. I think it could be a really interesting writing style to really sit down and dissect, but to just like quickly read through, it's kind of a lot. I will say this one, I have like the Barnes & Noble Classics edition. I don't even know if they really sell a lot of these anymore, but it's got an introduction in it with a bio of Oscar Wilde, which was really interesting. So if you have an edition that has a bio of him or something like that, it might be interesting. It says that this is one of his more like personal works, or at least it's considered to be, and so I don't know, having read a little bit of his bio gives it an interesting spin, gives you some more things to think about while reading this book. So I'm gonna go finish this book. I will update you when I'm finished with hopefully some better thoughts and a better idea of what this book is actually about. to post-Paris. I never finished wrapping up the picture of Dorian Gray, I don't think, while I was on vacation. So I was right in what I said I thought was going to happen. Basically, the picture starts changing based off of decisions that he makes, and it becomes this big introspective thing. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It was one of those books that was just okay. I think if I was in maybe a different point in my life, or certain things were happening, or I just generally related to the character more, this book could have been really interesting and life-changing. For me, the character just didn't really connect with me. I don't feel like I have anything happening in my life that made this feel super pertinent. So I don't know, it was alright. I think if you were going through certain things in your life, or you were at a very specific stage, this could be a super insightful, interesting read. But for me, it just felt okay. Like, it was interesting, I'm glad I've read it, but I can kind of move on now. It's not going to continue to impact me. I'm not really going to think about it, I don't think. So my husband definitely loves this book more than I do. So I think that there is room for this to be something that you really connect to. I think it's definitely worth giving it a shot. It just wasn't the book specifically to hit me hard. While I was in Paris, I did also finish A Winter's Promise, and I haven't really talked about this one much. I touched on it in my intro, but I didn't really talk about it in Paris, even though I read the whole thing while I was there. This book is super good. I've given it 4.5 stars. Basically, it's a forced marriage between this girl on one arc, which I explained the arcs in the intro, and guy on another arc. And it's one of those situations where she's kind of the unassuming but very stubborn and what's the best word, very strong female character, even though she's like tiny and stuff. And he's your classic super grumpy, super huge guy. And there's a lot of political intrigue in this one. This definitely felt like a setup type book, and I'm interested to see where the rest of the series goes. It was fun in its own right. It's not a book where it feels like it's all set up and you don't understand what's going on, but there's clearly more going on than what we got in this book. And you are not super informed on what's going on because you're only following from her point of view, the mean girl character. And she has no idea what's going on. She's being definitely thrown in to the wolves, essentially. Since you're following her point of view, you as a reader also don't really know what's going on. So that was a little bit frustrating for me. I definitely think that it would be interesting to have another point of view from the guy who actually knows what's going on and stuff. But I think there's probably a reason that we're being kept in the dark for now. I think that there's some room for some big plot twists, some big reveals when we finally figure out what the larger picture is. So I will definitely be continuing this series, not in this video, but I will for sure continue reading through this. I'm hoping to go get the next book soon so that when I'm done reading for this video, I can continue on with this. So highly recommend if you're looking for a good book. I will say there were a few interesting things on the translation. Like, they kept getting things out of caskets. I was like, why are we getting things out of a casket? So I don't know what the word is in French that is getting translated over to casket, but it felt a little weird to me. It's definitely kind of steampunk vibes. I really loved the fantasy world. There's a lot of interesting powers that you don't see in typical fantasy worlds. So I think it's a highly creative, super fun book, and I'm very interested to continue the series. So I would suggest Winter's Promise. And then while I was in Paris, I also found a copy of The Name of the Rose, which I got so that I had something to read on the plane. I didn't read a ton. I'm only about 50 pages in, and this is a pretty lengthy book. It's a little over 550, something like that. This is basically a murder mystery set in a monastery. What you get at the beginning, the first 50 pages kind of set up, you have the main monk who, I guess, is monk even the right word? I feel like monk is correct. Who's basically got this apprentice character. There's another word they use for it, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. And they are going around on some kind of mission for the emperor, delivering letters or something like that. While they're there, they stop at this monastery, and we're getting some foreshadowing that there's some crazy murders going on. And so the main monk has been asked by the head of that monastery to investigate. And so that's pretty much as far as I've gotten. I will continue to give you my thoughts as we go on this. So let's jump into the Interruptions. For a very overdue update. It has been a minute since I've filmed anything because this book is taking me a while to read, but I've officially passed the 400 page mark, which means I've got like, what, 150 pages? Is it that long? 140, more like that. So I'm getting close. I'm having mixed feelings about this book. It's like, the mystery is interesting, and there's so many fun elements of this book. Like, there's secret passages, a booby-trapped library, they're like in this monastery, and they're like secret passageways, and the things written in code and invisible ink, and like there's lots of fun elements to the book. But the writing style is just so slow. It's written, I can't remember if I've talked about it yet, but it's written as if it was being narrated, or like a journal entry, I guess, of a monk. It's set in the 1300s. You're writing as if this monk is like old now, and he's going back and saying like, here's the stuff that happened to me when I was young, and like an apprentice to this other monk. And so then he's like telling you the whole story, but it's written in so interesting of a way. And there's lots of things where we're getting sidetracked in, like, they're having arguments about like religious things, and I don't know, it's just so outdated. First of all, like, views on women, super outdated. It's like femininity is a sin type of stuff, which, like, I get fits the time period, like it's accurate, but it's also just a little annoying to spend so much time in these like religious debates. And I think the author is like a historian and philosopher and stuff, and so I think that's really like the author's main interest in this book. So it's hard coming into it from the point of view of that I'm here for the murder mystery part and I want to know who did it. But it's been like hundreds of pages now since the last person died, and we still haven't solved it. Like, it's been days. They're just like having these debates, like literal fist fights over whether Jesus was poor or not. And they still haven't got the murderer. And you're just like, hello. We like go focus on the guy that's killing people instead of like your debates. So I don't know. It's a very scathing review of how monasteries were run. Pretty much every single person in this book is corrupt or sinning in some way. And you're just like, wow, nobody's living all the stuff that they're arguing over. So I don't know. It's okay. I'm ready to be done with it. I'm trying to like just push through and read a ton of it so that I can get to my next two books because I'm really excited about them. So I've got about 130 pages. I will probably update you when I finish this book with my final thoughts. But so far it's just okay. I finished The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I'm struggling with my rating on this one. I'm going between a 2.5 and a 3. I think it's somewhere right around there. I gave it a 2.5 on Goodreads. Might bump that up. We'll see. Haven't decided yet. But I feel like this book is just so mismarketed. Like, it should not be being marketed as a murder mystery. I think if you went into this book knowing that it was more of like a historical fiction philosophy book, then you might be able to get enjoyment out of this book. My rating's just struggling, and I'm having a hard time because I never know how much to balance out my enjoyment of a book with how well I think the author did what they were trying to do. I think that the author was trying to use this murder mystery as a vehicle to showcase his knowledge about the time period and his thoughts on religion and some of the corruption that comes in things like monasteries. And I think he did that very well. He also obviously had the goal to write it as if it was written by somebody in the 1300s, and I think he accomplished that well. Like, he did what I think he was trying to set out to do. The problem is, with everybody marketing this and putting this out as a murder mystery, I just wasn't interested. It's not, if you go into it as a murder mystery, you're not gonna get what you want out of it. And that's where I had landed. I think he did what he was trying to do, but I personally didn't enjoy what it was. It's kind of where I'm at. So I don't know, maybe it's more of a 3-star, loses points for how much I enjoyed it, gains points for how well I think he did what he was trying to do. So that's kind of where I landed on that one. The ending, like, what is even happening there? Pretty much, again, as somebody who reads a lot of murder mysteries and was in this for the mystery plot, the ending was so anticlimactic. It was pretty much every other suspect died off at some point. And so then it was just the person who was left. So, I don't know. Again, I think if you were looking at it as the murders were a vehicle for him to look at some of the ways that being too intense about certain things can cause issues, which I think is what he's trying to do. I think a big point of this book was that he was trying to talk about how we take things to such extremes that they then cause larger problems. And a lot of these murders were related to how much the monks in the book were committed to knowledge and books and stuff like that, which is not a bad thing, but they're taking it to such an extreme that people were literally murdering to get a hold of this book. And so I get where he was going. I just personally, the style was just a little too off-putting for me to enjoy the book. And again, I think if I'd gone into it knowing what this book actually was, I could have enjoyed it more than going into it thinking it was a murder mystery. That being said, I do think that this could be a really interesting movie. And I know there is a movie of it, and I can totally see why you'd make a movie out of this, because even just reading it, I could see how visually this would be super interesting. You're in this monastery with a cemetery and all these like really cool settings of things, and the music that you could add of like the Gregorian chants and stuff like that. Like, I could totally see this being a super awesome movie if you cut it down. Obviously, you'd have to cut out some of the stuff in order to just fit it into the timeline of a movie. And so I think that the trimming you'd have to do to get this down to a movie length would cut out a lot of the stuff that just felt excessive, a lot of like random history facts that I don't feel like had any bearing on the plot and stuff like that. I think if you just went and edited this down a bit, you could make a really good movie out of it. So I don't know, I haven't looked into the movie, I don't know if I plan on watching it, but I can see how somebody read this book and thought, oh, that would make a really good movie. So I also feel like you could totally make this a super creepy horror movie if you focused more on the mystery part of it, because it was a really interesting premise. It just was drowned out by all of this philosophy and history. And so if you were in it for that plot line, there was just like hundreds of pages in between things happening where they're like debating religious things that I personally didn't care about. So that's how I feel about The Name of the Rose. I think it's probably worth a shot as long as you go into it knowing that you're not getting a murder mystery, you're getting a historical fiction book. Okay, that being said, I did move on to Shadow of the Wind. I've gotten 90 pages in this, and unfortunately I think I'm gonna DNF it. The plot of this book, super interesting. Would love it if it was just focused on the plot, but this book is so, I don't even really know what the word is for it. Very much so from a male point of view. There's not, in the 90 pages that I've read, there has not been a single fleshed out female character. And honestly, I could get past that. Like, I've read plenty of books where there were only really male characters, whatever. But the way that they're discussing women in this book, there's not been a single female character that has popped up that has not been explained or described based off of how big her breasts are. Like, that's every single female character is in here for a sexual purpose, and I'm over it. Like, I don't want to read it. The plot is super interesting and I'm so intrigued, but I just can't get past that. And I don't know, like every conversation between two men is about some sexual reference or some, I don't know, like that's the only purpose that women are serving in this book, and it's just starting to grind on my nerves too much. Like, I'm only 90 pages in. For that to have stood out as the main theme in this book in 90 pages is a bit much. So I do think I'm going to DNF this. I will come back and do a book in Spain some other time. I don't know, maybe this is one that like at some point I'd go back and be interested enough, but we're just not into the plot enough. We've gotten way more of that than we have of the plot. And I just don't think I feel like wading through all of that just to get to this book. So I do think I'm going to DNF this one for now. My sister-in-law did read it and she really enjoyed it, so I do think it's one that, like, don't let this be a huge, you shouldn't read this necessarily, but I personally don't love reading stuff like that. I'm not a big romance person, so it's just kind of frustrating me, and I don't know, that's just not the kind of stuff I want to read, especially right now, having just waded through all of the femininity is sin in Name of the Rose. I just am not up to it, and so I'm gonna put this one down. I'm gonna DNF it. I don't know if I'll ever get back to it. The plot was interesting, it was intriguing how they set it up, but I just can't bring myself to read that much of that. So I'll get back to Spain in another video. If you have any Spain recommendations, let me know. I might just read Don Quixote. That one's a big one. I haven't ever read it, so that one might be the one I end up picking. So put a marker in that. Next time I do a European books video, we'll get back to Spain. That being said, I am now going to start my pick for Portugal, which is Death with Interruptions. I'm super excited about this one actually, so hopefully this one gets us back up. This video started off so strong and we've kind of been going downhill since then, so hopefully this one can end us off on a good note. But I had a really hard time picking for Portugal, so if I don't like this one, I do have two other options that I am interested in for Portugal. So one of them is this like murder mystery book that was published originally as like letters back and forth, super interesting, and then the other one is a non-fiction book by a like doctor person. So do have a couple other options, but I'm really hoping that this one is good. I'm going into it knowing that this is probably more of like a literary fiction book. I'm not expecting a crazy plot, so hopefully I've got my expectations set in a better place for this book. But this one will be our final book, so let's go get into reading it. It's a bit of a shorter one too, so hopefully I can enjoy this one, and I will check back in with you at some point. So let's get into Death with Interruptions. I have finished Death with Interruptions. To be completely honest, it's been about a little over a week since I finished this book, and I just got busy and haven't gotten around to filming this wrap-up, so hopefully I can remember all of my thoughts on this book. I had a hard time deciding what to rate it. I think I've settled on a 4-star. This book wasn't quite what I was expecting it to be. I know at one point I said that I thought this might be a book where I might want to highlight some stuff. I thought it might be really like creative, beautiful writing. And not to say that it's not good writing, it is, but I felt like it was much more straightforward than you would expect a book in the literary fiction realm to be, especially by an author who's won a Nobel Prize. So my first impressions were, or like my thoughts based off of just kind of the superficial stuff, were definitely kind of wrong, but I'm not mad about it. I actually really enjoyed the writing style. I think what has made this author, at least for this book, really popular is probably just more of the concepts that he's writing about, not so much the writing itself. I think he writes these really interesting concepts that really make you think from very unique perspectives. He gets a lot of stuff that you're like, oh, I never would have thought about that, but he writes it in a very straightforward way. It's not one of those books where you feel super confused and you can't even really tell what the author's trying to get across. The point is very much so right out there for you, but it does make you sit and think, like, oh, I never would have thought of that angle on this topic. So for example, with death leaving, like I never would have thought how it impacted the mafia. I never would have thought about how it impacted like all these different things. So it was very interesting, all of the different types of details that go into it. That being said, I didn't love the ending. So there's kind of almost like 3 sections of this book. There's the death going away part. Then there's a section where death comes back, which I don't think is a spoiler. I think you know that you're gonna see death. And then there's a part where a third character gets introduced. And once that character came in, I kind of lost interest. The ending was just like, wait, what? Like we went through all of this stuff, all of these interesting things for it to just have a very anticlimactic ending. So that's kind of why I didn't rate it 5 stars. I think it was on track to have potentially been there if the ending was a little stronger. So I don't know. Not that it's not strong, I just felt like it just kind of like, it just ends and you're just like, what is happening? Which partially I feel like that could make you think more about it, but I personally like my endings to be wrapped up a little neater than that. The one thing I will say about this author is I feel like his writing style, and based off of Goodreads reviews, is either you like it or you hate it. It's kind of similar to, is it Sally Rooney that doesn't use quotation marks? There's no quotation marks around dialogue. It's switching back and forth within the same paragraph, like there's no break. Personally, I don't feel like I ever got confused about who was talking really. Like there were maybe 1 or 2 parts where I was like, wait, I'm a little confused of who's talking, but for the most part, I felt like it was still really easy to follow. It's also like run-on sentences and paragraphs galore. Like there will be paragraphs that are literally like 3 pages long. It's not your traditional writing style with breaks and punctuation and all that stuff. Personally, I felt like it still flowed fine. Like I feel like a lot of people, either you hate it and you're so confused and you can't figure out what's going on, or you feel like it just makes it flow so smoothly because you're not having all these breaks. So I personally enjoyed it. I would love to read other books by this author. I think that I can get behind the writing style. But I could see it being one that a lot of people didn't like because it is maybe a little harder to follow. I don't know. I thought it was fine. But if you do want to read it, I do think it's a book that I would suggest everybody gives at least a try. I think that this would be a good one to start with if you're jumping into this author's writing. I haven't read any of the other ones obviously, so I can't really say, but I felt like this was a good introduction book. You might just want to get it from your library or as an ebook or something if you're nervous about it. I got mine off the thrift book, so it was super cheap anyways, but just be aware the writing style is a little non-traditional is how I'd put it. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I probably will pick up some of the other books by this author at some point. I know this one isn't his most famous. There's one that's called like Blindness, maybe something like that, but it's like a pandemic book, so I felt like it's starting with this one. So but with that brings us to the end of this video. So to do a quick recap, Death with Interruptions we just talked about, 4 stars. Right before that I DNF'd Shadow of the Wind. Don't need to go further into that. Name of the Rose, 2.5 stars. I thought it was just okay. Winter's Promise, or Oh Winter's Promise, 4.5 stars. This one was definitely my favorite of the video, and I have actually already started the 2nd book of the series, so that's how you know I like it, I guess. And then back to the very beginning, Picture of Dorian Gray, 3 stars. I thought this one was just average. Nothing crazy. I have not thought about it again since reading it. And that's that. So these are the books that I read in this video. Obviously I talked about a few other ones at the beginning, but that concludes my basically a month of reading various European authors. This video is going to get uploaded instead of my March monthly instead of my March monthly wrap-up, because I actually spent all month reading these books. So the name of the rose really slowed me down. But that being said, that is the end of the video. So thank you so much for watching. If you have other countries that you would like me to do next, let me know. I think I've got a couple books for another Southeast Asia. I definitely need to get to an Africa one at some point because I haven't gotten to that one yet. Definitely need to do that one soon. But if you have any recommendations of books from either other authors from these countries that you think I'd like better, especially Spain, I do think I'll probably end up reading Don Quixote in a future video. So just let me know if you have any recommendations, or if you have any thoughts on these books, if you've read them, if you thought the same as me or different. And I will see you in the next one. So thank you so much for watching. Bye.